Hi, a warm welcome to everyone. We'll start the presentation in another 5 to 10 minutes. In the meanwhile, I would request you to check if you can hear my voice. If there are any problems, please ping me through the chat session or the questions window in the GoToMeeting tool. Yeah, can you all hear me? If anything wrong, then please ping me. Just one more test. Can you all hear me? Uh, I think I was a bit low on the voice. I have increased my voice physically. I hope you all can hear me. Again, if any problems, then stop me. We have another 3 to 4 minutes to start off with the presentation. In the meanwhile, let me know if anything wrong on the voice front or any connection problems or any such thing. Yeah, I think we are almost about to begin this webinar. I have got a mixed bag. Like a few people are not able to hear me. A few are able to hear. Rather, frankly speaking, I was not talking for some time. I just sent that message whether you can hear me, and I was waiting. But however, I am talking now, and hopefully everyone is able to hear me. There can be only one mistake through the GoToMeeting tool, which can lead to you missing out on my voice. Under the audio options, you can see there is a option called as use telephone, and the other one is use mic and speaker. So ensure that you are, if it is connected through the PC or laptop, then ensure that you are the voice is connected through VoIP. Use your mic and speaker option. If not, if there are any problems in connecting through that, you can use the telephone option and dial me, right? So I think I have 1 more minute and we'll begin the session in that time. Thank you. Those who are not yet able to hear me, I would request them to check a few settings on your side, maybe the loudness of your speakers. So shall we start the presentation? It's almost 12 now. Uh, I can see good number of attendees and hopefully rather most of them are able to hear me pretty clearly. If not, I would request them to check a few settings on your side as well. And as mentioned, keep a tab on the audio option in the GoToMeeting. There are two options. One is use telephone. The other one is use mic and speaker. If any problems in connecting through mic and speaker, that is through VoIP or your PC or laptop, then you can use the telephone option and call to the given numbers over there. Okay, so once again, a warm welcome to all of you. As we have already discussed that we all can hear each rather, it's a one-way thing. You all can hear me. And of course, the chat session is open throughout the time. You can anytime ping me through the chat session. Again, I'll give a few seconds over here, check out if anything wrong. So hopefully everything is in place, and rather the non-technical things are in place. Let's go to the reason why we have all gathered here. Unfortunately, I have to do this wherein all the attendees have been kept in mute mode. If any questions, then use the chat window. I'll keep an eye on it and try to reply to all the questions at the end of the session. So if any questions, use the chat window. If any questions after this webinar, you can get back to me through an SR with the attention to Kapil. Well, a standard question could be, can I get this presentation and recording? Yes, I will be keeping it in solution. Number has been written over there, and it will also be available through the VAR desktop under marketing webcast. So if you want to have a revision of this presentation later on, you can do it through these two channels. To begin with, of course, I would like to introduce myself. I am Kapil Gaitonde. I am in the SolidWorks technical support team based out in India, and I'm specializing in the simulation products. Today we are going to have a discussion, or different words are there, webcast, webinar on SolidWorks simulation meshing, and let's begin with it. What we are going to discuss today. First of all, the two meshing solvers that we have, which have two different algorithms using which you can mesh any intricate geometries. To divide it, we are going to discuss shell mesh, beam mesh, mixed mesh, a combination of solid shell and beam. Contacts, a critical thing whenever we go into mixed mesh is the way the two kind of elements are going to interact between each other, and the contacts are going to help us in that. There was a separate webinar on contacts. However, critical things with respect to mesh which are required for good connection will be discussed in this presentation. optimal mesh. That is, after I mesh, obviously each and every user will be having a question if his mesh is good, if he has achieved the right quality of mesh, if the mesh that he has created will give him the right results. So we'll discuss that. And finally, a few common issues, more from technical support point of view, wherein I in the remaining time I'll try to highlight on them, and maximum issues will be discussed. So let's begin. The two measures that we have. One of them is the standard measure. The other one is curvature-based measure. Standard measure will activate the Voronoi-Delaunay meshing scheme. Well, pretty complex. Yes, it is a pretty complex algorithm. I can discuss it in this presentation, but I might need the complete 1 hour to discuss only this particular algorithm. So my concentration would be only on the application side of it. However, there might be any engineer who wants to understand the algorithm in detail. I have written the solution numbers which will help you in understanding the algorithm in detail. Rather, you'll find such solution numbers in all the slides. Keep a tab on them. If necessary, you can take down those solution numbers, and after this presentation you can have a look at those solutions. They will definitely be helpful in understanding these topics in more detail. To start with the standard measure, now it has a certain algorithm, it has a certain parameters which a user can give, using which it will start meshing internally. Now software has a logic by which it will derive these parameters automatically depending on the geometry, the kind of mesh used, the kind of loading present. However, I would suggest users to be more alert on the parameters that have been used by the software. I have seen users using these parameters blindly. They will just click the reset button. Whatever value comes over here, select accept the settings and mesh the geometry. Yes, it will definitely try to mesh with that particular setting, but a good understanding of these parameters will definitely help you in getting the best quality of mesh, the fastest solutions, and I can say accurate solutions as well. So to start with, you can see over here, the first parameter is the global element size. This is the one of the parameters which has to be given for the standard measure. This global element size is going to, rather it is the average element size that will be used by the solver, rather the meshing solver, to mesh the complete geometry. So by default it will be there will be a calculated value. However, a user, I would suggest a user to browse through the model, find out the different thicknesses present in the model, and arrive at a good element size. Apart from that, this is not a written rule or anything, but you can see over that the software will have calculated quite complicated value, which is 27.3477 millimeters. Now, yes, it looks good and it's pretty accurate. However, from user point of view, it would be good to round off these values. That is, I would suggest using a value of 25 over here, by which a user knows he has tried a iteration with 25, he has got a certain result. So round off those values and give certain manual values over there. Moving on, there is a tolerance, that is a average global element size is set, and the tolerance is going to be the variation permitted on this global element size. Okay, so both these parameters are important. Obviously, a small tolerance, or I can say sharp tolerance, is going to, rather it is not going to help the solver. Reducing the tolerance is going to help the solver. It allows enough mesh variation, rather element size variation, and that can help the measure in solving. So before I move on to the next slide, give me a moment. Give me a moment. I'm just browsing through the questions so that I have not missed out on any critical thing. Those questions which I can address at the end of session, I'll keep them at the end of the session. However, if anything important, I would like to address it now. Okay, nothing that I need to hurry up. I can address the questions at the end. So we have seen the global element size, the tolerance. Now let's move on to a interesting option which is called as automatic transition. You can see it is present over here. Selecting this checkbox is going to tell the solver to attain a certain quality of mesh in the sharp regions, that is wherein there are radiuses, small fillets, small elements. It will try to mesh those features with a better quality of mesh or smaller element size automatically. Now give me a moment. There is a question which I would like to address before I go on. Just a second. Something wrong? And then a mistake in the slide that was shown on the screen, hence I'm just checking it. Just a second. Okay, now it's in place. Automatic transition. Now this is a very good feature which will definitely mesh the intricate features automatically with a good quality of mesh. For small geometries, small parts, even I can say to some extent assemblies, it is a very good feature. But if there are too many intricate features in the geometry and we are not interested at stresses or deflections at all those features, then I would suggest unselecting this checkbox. We have seen that with the selection of this checkbox, it will also be it will also lead to a mesh failure. Hence, sometimes I would suggest, rather, the first thing that I would suggest when you see a mesh failure is unselect this checkbox. So later on, you have options which I'll discuss in this presentation, using which you can attain a good quality of mesh at the intricate or the necessary regions. However, at the global level, this is going to set the setting at the global level. Hence, if necessary, just neglect it, or if permissible, neglect it. So any questions at the moment? I don't think so. Yeah. Let's move on. At the moment, we have two different quality of meshes. One is called as the draft quality of mesh and the other is the high quality. When we select the draft quality of mesh for shell elements, as you can see in the image over here, it will show you the three-noded shell element, triangular shell element. We call it as draft quality. There are also different words like linear element or a quadratic element. So names are different, but ultimately it will be having only 3 nodes. Apart from that, when this option is not selected, the quality of mesh will be called as high quality, and that is also called as a parabolic element. So if it is a 2D element, then it would look something like this. If it is a 3D, a tetrahedron in shape, then you can see it will have 4 nodes at the end of the tetrahedron. And if it is a high quality thing, it will have mid-side nodes at the lines or the edges of the tetrahedron. So basically when we select this option, that is draft quality, if the checkbox is selected, the meshing will be done with the first kind of elements, that is the linear triangular elements or linear solid elements. Whereas if it is not selected, then it will be done with parabolic triangular elements. So obviously when we are selecting the parabolic elements, they are going to take more solution time, more nodes, more degrees of freedom, and draft quality will be definitely faster. But for accurate results, it is suggested to go with parabolic triangular elements. It is going to increase the degrees of freedom. However, it will assure that the quality of results is very good. Also for curvaceous geometries or geometries wherein there are enough radiuses, fillets, etc., I would suggest using the parabolic triangular elements. But it's not a rule of thumb. Initial analysis, go ahead with the draft quality of elements. If anything, uh, like if you want to, if we conclude on the quality of the setup, if we have done the right setup, then move on to the high quality elements. Moving on to the next option, that is automatic trial for solid. This is a very good option which will help you in case of mesh failures. If you are not sure on the element size that is going to mesh the geometry correctly, then this option can do it automatically through the software. So initially we are going either software, or we can manually set the global element size and the tolerance on it. Using this option, that is automatic trial for solids, we can set the number, we can set a certain number of iterations using which the software will iterate with different element size to attain the mesh. Now, by default, in the property manager of the mesh, you can see we can specify the number of trials. Apart from that, if you want to specify what would be the change in element or the change in tolerance, then you can do it through simulation options, default options, mesh. We can see over there. Over there, we have the option of global element size factor for each trial and the tolerance factor for each trial. So if a element size of 25 is set over there, 25 cross 0.8, the reduced element size would be used for the next trial. So going ahead, you can use that option to do the we can only set that option and the solver will do the meshing accordingly. So this is a very good option in case of automatic iterations for the mesh. Any questions at the moment on this particular thing? I'll just browse through it. There is a limit on the number of trials. The maximum limit is 10, and yes, obviously it is going to take a bit of time. Every iteration will be done, hence it is going to take a bit of time in when this option is selected. However, if there is a intricate geometry wherein you are not able to conclude on the mesh size, use this option and the solver will do the meshing for you. So let's move ahead. Remesh failed parts with incompatible mesh. Now, before moving into this option, I would give a small, I would like to discuss a little bit on what is compatible and incompatible mesh. You can see this first image. It is on incompatible mesh. Now, there are two parts. One of them is small box. Another one, a surface is visible. However, it is a bigger part of the box. Try to see the adjoining line over here. There is a kind of discontinuity that you see at this particular junction, and that is due to what we call as discontinuous mesh or incompatible mesh. Now, in case of compatible, the software will try to attain a certain kind of continuity at that adjacent surfaces between those two boxes. There will be a single layer of nodes between those two boxes, which will be used by the adjoining elements. Now, obviously, compatible mesh is more accurate than incompatible mesh, especially when we are seeing the results at the junction. But seeing it from meshing point of view, compatible mesh can lead to mesh failures, especially if there are different parts, rather two parts of exceptionally different sizes. One of them is too big and the other one is too small. Then I would suggest using the incompatible mesh in that case. However, there is a option in the software as well, wherein if you are doing the meshing at the assembly level, and if you want to tell the software whenever there is a failure of the mesh due to a compatible mesh being selected, then unselect it and do the meshing with incompatible mesh. So this option is going to do that work, wherein we are selecting remesh failed parts with incompatible mesh. So all those surfaces which are in connection with the part that is affected will be incompatible, and the part which is failing in meshing itself will be meshed separately. We can also have different mesh controls. We'll discuss in later slides, but this is what remesh failed parts with incompatible mesh is going to do. So this is all about the first solver, that is a standard mesher. There are enough controls. One important thing would be the mesh controls part of it, which I'll be discussing later on. But basically, when you go to the property manager of standard mesher, you will see these controls. So give me a second, I'll just browse through the questions, if anything, which I need to address now itself. Okay. Jacobian points, wait a minute, I'll be discussing it. These are few questions I can see around over here. And Jacobian points, give me a moment, we'll discuss on Jacobian points. There was a blackout on the screen, yes, now it should be okay. I think otherwise nothing that I need to address now itself. So let's move on. Next measure, that is the curvature based measure, creates more elements in higher curvature areas automatically. As you can say, the name itself suggests that which is called as curvature based measure. It is going to, it's rather, I cannot say it is primarily designed in that way, but it has the capacity wherein it can automatically create more number of elements wherever it finds high curvatures. In 2010, it supports compatible mesh. This was a big, I can say, negative point in the previous versions. However, now it has been addressed. Even the curvature-based measure is going to support compatible mesh. And we have just now discussed what is compatible mesh and incompatible mesh. Volume meshing part of the curvature-based measure supports multi-core for assemblies. Now, a few people might be aware that we did not support multi-core or multiple processing in measures, whereas curvature-based measure supports it, and here is what it is. Now this is another interesting feature. Curvature-based measure can check for interferences between bodies before meshing it. So if at all it finds any interferences in the geometry, rather I should say assembly, then it will rather stop meshing and give the necessary warning. This is useful for a user when he is not caring about interferences and the problems come while solving the geometry. Of course, this check will happen only if bonded contact has been given between either at the global level, whether at the component level or at the local level. Now, obviously, the parameters or the important parameters that will be based on which the curvature measure will do the meshing. Now, because this is a VAR webinar and I have seen users coming up with funny questions, here I don't want to miss out on one particular observation. I have seen users practically copying the settings from standard measure to curvature measure. They'll just click the different radio buttons, copy the size, that is first size over here, which is maximum element size. Over there it was average element size, do not miss out on that. And the second thing, which was minimum element size, whereas over there it is the tolerance. I have practically seen users who copy the tolerance from standard measure to the curvature based measure and try to measure it. So do not be blind on the parameters. Rather, I would request you all not to be blind on the parameters that are present over here. Try to have a better understanding of them. Definitely it will help you in a bigger way. So the parameters over here, maximum element size and the minimum element size. I think nothing much to explain over there. It defines itself. Moving ahead, a very interesting and different parameter over here is maximum number of elements in a circle. Now this particular parameter sets the minimum number of elements on a full imaginary circle of which the arc of the feature is a part. You can see the red line on this particular circular diagram that has been drawn. That red line is the part of the geometry. Now this value, that is 8, is going to define the number of elements that will be present in this complete circle. Now limits are 4 and 36. If at the moment, if we are set the value to 8, then it is going to try to attain 8 elements in this imaginary circle, and in short 2 elements in the red part of the circle or the practical feature that is present over here. This in turn is going to lead to an angle of 45 degree over there, right? The diagram should be clear in explaining that thing. H, which is the arc length, can be calculated through S is equal to R theta, or whatever you may say. Here it comes out to be R alpha, which is going to be the H, or it will be the element edge length over here. So for this option to come into effect, the H value should lie between the maximum and the minimum element size that has been specified over here. This will ensure a certain quality of elements has been attained throughout the geometry. This will also ensure that enough elements are created at curvature. So this is a very different, intricate option. Try to play around with. That's all I can say at the moment. Yeah. Okay, I'll finish this and let's see the questions. Very simple option, element size growth ratio. We are specifying the minimum element size. We are specifying the maximum element size. This particular ratio, that is element size growth ratio, is going to specify how the variation will be between these two element sizes. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Any questions? I'm just browsing through the questions. Give me a moment. I have two questions. Like as I told you, Jacobian points, there is a slide on it. I'll discuss it once that comes up. How we set the minimum element size? Now, this is a very good question. Rather, I should say there is no formula for setting this particular minimum element size. Browse through the model, find out, like I'm going to discuss a few tools by which you can find out small features in the geometry. These small features are going to tell you how you are going, are going to tell you the small features that are present in the element, geometry. And using those small features, they'll tell you, okay, yeah, I have a radius of 2 millimeters in the geometry. So I should be permitting a minimum element size of at least 1.5 millimeters, right? So that would be the way to do it. There is no formula or anything on that thing, but yes, that's the way. I would suggest wait for some more time. You'll see that slide, and I think your question should be addressed over there. Right, let's move on. Jacobian points, please wait for some time. I can see a few questions on that thing. Please wait for some time. Okay, so let's move on to solid mesh. Rather, there is nothing separate to discuss over here. Or it would be like we are going to use the two existing measures over here, play around with the different parameters and try to attain the mesh. There is nothing separate or different to be done over here. So I'll not be discussing much on it. But moving on to shell and beams, there are a lot of things to discuss. And before that, before we start off with shell elements and before we start off with beam elements, we need to realize the fact that beams and shells are an approximation to real life. Obviously, they are not the 1:1 entities which are present in the true geometry or the practical part that we are having. So rather it's quite understood, but yet sometimes there will be an expectation wherein a user wants the same results that he gets with a solid element. No, it has its own work. There are reasons for optimizing a solid mesh to shell mesh or beam mesh. Understand that thing, and and go accordingly. Especially the points to be considered or understood would be the way the beams and shells are connected between each other and to a solid geometry. So give a thorough thought on how they are connected, what is happening, what exactly a beam mesh, the beam element representation does, how the joints are connected, how the shell end is connected to a solid, etc. So be attentive to those, try to understand them. That will give a better understanding of shells and mesh, or a better interpretation of results that we get from a shell mesh and beam mesh. The cross section of the beam is taken into account when calculating the beam properties, but when bonding to a shell or solid, it is the line that is bonded to a surface. It is not the cross section. Now, I understand for a non-analyst, this might be what the hell, why are we doing in this way? But that's the way it is. Like, it is a line, and try to understand that the physical properties or the strength of the beam is considered. However, it is not the beam cross section that will be considered. And rather, I can say that's the way almost all FEA software works. But the ease of use in simulation makes it, in SolidWorks simulation makes it feel that, okay, why it should not be in that way. But be aware of these things. Once you are aware, you will be able to handle those things in a better way. In case of beam joints, a beam node is connected to a orthogonal projection of that node on the target surface. It is again not the cross section of the beam. Well, yes, these are the, I cannot say limitation, but this is the way it is. And if the user is not okay with this, and if he wants more accurate results, there is no way out but to use the solid mesh as it is. Before I start off with the shell mesh, I want to just go through the questions. Any other element apart from tetrahedron high quality mesh? Two questions now itself. Where specifically use curvature based mesh? Like, you could see a few distinctive features that are present in both the meshes. I do not say use this measure over here, use that measure over there, but you can see if it is a curvaceous geometry, if it is large assembly and you can see many parts, you want multi-core processing to be done, then obviously curvature mesh based measure is going to do a better job over there. I can say comparatively it is a new measure. Standard measure was an old measure and has been present for quite some time with solder simulation. However, this new measure is doing a very good job, and as you can see, the big limitation of compatible mesh is no more there. I think in almost all cases you can try out curvature based measures, nothing wrong. But there is no specified line which says, okay, if this is the thing, then use standard measure. If this is the thing, use curvature based measure. Even using standard measures, we can apply local mesh controls and get the same quality of mesh as curvature based measure. But when you see at automation, when we want to specify a big element range like 10 millimeters to 2 millimeters in the geometry, curvature based measure can do it automatically for you. So both have their own plus and minus. I do not have a slide which gives the comparison of these two measures, but yes, they are good in their own way, in their own domain. So I would not do a separation of them. Any other, the second question which I want to address is any other element apart from tetrahedron high quality mesh. Now, one word answer is no, we do not have it. Shell mesh, it is a triangular element. Either it is a linear element or a parabolic element. If we say tetrahedron or solid element, we have linear element or parabolic elements. Yes, there are software which can provide n number of different elements, etc. However, we are trying to include almost all the capabilities in these elements only. With respect to having a hex or a, you may say, cube based elements for solid thing, etc. We, like, unlike before, we have the freedom of having any number of elements in the geometry. rather I should not say any number of elements, but we can comparatively have large number of elements in the geometry. Now onwards, rather we can see it around wherein we have enough what is it, processor capacity, RAM capacity, etc., using which we can attain even solutions of even very high degrees of freedom meshes. Hence, I think in one way it can be seen as a limitation, but I would not say it is a limitation. It is not necessary to have n number of different elements. These two elements are doing their job in all the necessary job that would be required for doing a finite element analysis. If anything more on this question, we'll discuss it later on. Okay, to move ahead, why SolidWorks is not having quad or hex mesh? Okay, again, it's the same related question. I'll a few things I have told you now. I'll discuss it in more detail if necessary later on. So let's move on. Well, shell mesh, how to create it? Very simple. By default, all uniform sheet metal parts will be treated as shell elements, except for drop test studies. All surfaces will be treated as shell elements. Now, when I say by default, when we are creating a new study, automatically those elements, rather I should say those parts or features will be treated as shell elements. So try to understand this. Rather a few users might also observe that when we create a new feature, new study in either 2009 or 2010 version, you'll see a bit of time taken while creating this study, unlike before. And the reason is it is browsing through all the available parts to find out to do this particular conversion automatically. Previously, user had to do it manually, whereas this is done automatically at the moment, and hence you might see a bit of variation, or I should say an increase in time while creating a new study, but nothing to worry. It is a one-time activity and it is helping the user in a big way. All the things are automated because of that. Apart from that, we have this feature which rather I should say, first I'll discuss what this feature is. We can select a surface from solid body and treat them as shells. Now how to do it? Just select the solid feature which has been automatically created, right click on it, you'll see the option define shell by selected faces. Using this option we can create a set of surfaces which can be treated as shell mesh. Now this feature was present in the previous version, that is 2007, 2008. However, in 2009 when we fine-tuned the front end, wherein we said only sheet metal parts will be treated as shell elements, it was removed in for certain reasons, wherein it was a perfect automation. We had given enough features in SolidWorks wherein parts could be converted to sheet metal parts, or solid parts could be converted to sheet metal parts, and later on they could be used in simulation. However, due to popular demand, requests from different users, etc., this option has been reintroduced in 2010. So if a user wants to treat a certain surface of the solid as a shell, then he can use this option. Automatically the solid feature will be, I can say, excluded from the analysis, and the shells will be active in the analysis. And measures, nothing different, they remain the same as those we have already discussed earlier. Now, very critical thing and important thing for shell mesh is shell normals. Do not miss out on it. However, if the user is interested only in the displacement results or temperature results of thermal studies, then this option may not be of that much importance. Whereas if it is a stress result which is important for the user, then do not miss out on this option. Rather, I should say the behavior, functionality, or the way the mesh is created. By default, the software is going to align the shells properly. If the option under simulation options, default options, automatic realignment for non-composite shells is selected. By default, the software is going to do it. It will do our job. However, a user is suggested to browse through the model and check if all the shells have been aligned properly. This option will also take a bit of time. I have kept a different slide for that. I'll discuss it in detail. However, at the moment, it will do it. In any case, if the shell is not aligned properly and a user does not want to use this option, however he wants to do it manually, then there is an option by which we can select a certain surface, we can right click on the mesh, select the flip shell elements option, that will flip the necessary shells and align the shell normals properly. Now obviously the basic question would be which direction is the top surface of shell. Orange color will represent the bottom face of the shell, and this is the default option. However, user has option to change the color. It is again present in simulation options, system options, mesh color. So do not miss out on this option. Whenever there is shell mesh present in the study, ensure that the shells are aligned properly. Moving on, shell formulations. Now this may not be pure meshing thing, but yes, this thing has to be considered while meshing. Hence I am covering it in this presentation. When you edit a particular shell that has been defined, you'll get different formulations. One of them is thin shell formulation, the other is thick, and finally composites. So in general, use thin shells when the thickness to span ratio is less than 0.05. Be aware of this, thickness to span ratio is less than 0.05. However, if a user is not sure if the thickness is more than that, then go ahead with the thick shell formulation. However, if I would like to add that if he is not sure and if he does not know which of them to select, then nothing wrong in blindly selecting the thick shell option. More details, browse through the solution. There are enough theoretical things over there. They should be of use to you. Moving on, the third formulation, which is composites. This again is a very big chapter. I am going to discuss more on the application part of it or the options that are present over here. It can take me complete 1 hour to discuss composites in detail. However, be aware of a few things and you can start off using it with these options explained. It is available in static frequency and buckling studies only. To start off with the different options when we select composites under shell definition. First one is the sandwich option. Over here you can see that by default the shell is considered to be having 3 layers, the central layer which is the core and 2 skins which are present on this central layer which will represent the composite. And I think I will not go deep into it. There are many things to be discussed. However, that's what at the moment I would like to say. We can define the number of, if not, where obviously when the sandwich option is not selected, you will get this option of total plies, wherein we can define the number of plies that you want in the composite shell. Moving on, the symmetric option, we can specify the number of plies and we can specify whether they are symmetric with respect to a central layer or not symmetric. If it is not symmetric, there can be variation of thicknesses of the layers which are on both the sides of the central layer, or it can be even variation of the material properties. Now either we can specify the same material for all the plies or we can specify different materials. So depending, this checkbox is going to decide that thing. Rotate 0 degree reference, this is going to decide the, I should say, the reference using which the angle of composite layers is considered. The bottom property manager, you can see this particular property manager is going to give us an table based thing which will help us in giving thicknesses for different layers, the angle with respect to the reference that of for different layers and the material for the different layers. You can see the bottom thing wherein minus 90 degree to 90 degree. Using that we can specify or change the angle of the composite layers. Moving ahead, composite orientation, that is just now what we discussed, the shell normal thing. Either they are oriented on the positive Z direction or the negative Z direction. We can set it over here. And finally, the offset, that is the location of the central layer. Either it can be at the middle, top, bottom, or we can specify a fraction of the total thickness measured from the mid surface to the reference surface, using which we can specify the location of the composites. Now I have covered almost what I should have discussed in 1 hour in 2 minutes. However, that's what it is. Solutions should help you. Do not miss out on those solution numbers. As I told you, for composite orientation, the shell normals are very important, especially when we are setting the composite orientation tab over here. Ensure that the shell normals are aligned properly for composite elements. Rather, if composites have been used, then ensure that shell normals are aligned properly. So moving ahead, the next type of element, beam mesh. Now again here, by default, all elements will be treated as beams. Beam elements are supported for static frequency, buckling, and nonlinear studies. Nonlinear is an addition in 2010. Large displacement solutions in static studies is not supported for beams. There is no separate measure or control on the way mesh is created. That is, we don't have any mesh controls, element size, etc. The software will do it on its own. Now moving ahead, for accurate results, the length of the beam, like this is more of a theoretical concept, but we do not want to miss out on that. The accurate results, for accurate results, the length of the beam should be 20 times larger than the longest dimension of its cross section. So do not miss out on that. That does not mean that we cannot have beam elements with smaller length, but this is also a reality. Now again, when we are speaking of by default and when the software converts beam elements to solid mesh, before before I mean when in 2007, 2006, 2008 versions, etc., it was left out and automatically all beam elements were converted to, rather all elements were converted to beam elements. However, now from 2010 it has been very well fine-tuned, and by default, if a element, like I would read out this thing, if the length of by the largest orthogonal cross-section distance from its centroid y is less than 3, then they are meshed with solid elements. So by default, when we create a new study, any such combination wherein L by Y ratio is less than 3, then it is treated as a solid element. However, that does not restrict the user. If a user in whichever case wants to treat it as a beam element, then he is free to do it. Obviously, so the software will face problems wherein it does not know. Now I have taken an example of a perfect cube. There is no chance the software can know which should be the direction of the beam element. However, we can treat it as a beam element, and when we right click on the beam, there is an option called as define beam neutral axis. Using this option, we can specify the direction of the neutral axis. So even with all the restrictions present, theoretical restrictions or due to whatever reasons, if a user wants to move ahead with a beam mesh for a certain kind of solid, then he can do that. Beam properties, when we right click on the beam, we have the edit definition option, which will permit us to give the beam properties. The beam can be treated as a beam or it can be treated as a truss. Beam will have 6 degrees of freedom and truss will have 3 degrees of freedom, that is translations only. Apart from that, if we have selected the beam option, then we have the option of playing around with the end connections only, wherein we can say it could be a rigid, it could be hinged connection, it could be sliding, or we can do it manually also. Apart from that, from 2010, if a user wants to study the torsional behavior of a beam, then we have more properties which can be given, using which we can check the torsional stresses and deflections. However, it needs certain inputs to be given for beams. And those are something like this. It is one of them is torsional constant. The below solution should be useful in understanding these parameters in more detail. Distance from the center of the section to the point of the maximum torsional shear. And finally, the shear factor, the ratio of effective area under shear, beam's cross-section area. So we need to specify these parameters if a user has to study the torsional behavior of the beams as well. Finally, solids, shells, beams. A user wants to mix up all those things and wants to, rather almost all intricate assemblies will be in this way, and a bit of discussion on that thing. As I told you, on creating a new study in an assembly, by default, or by the way, if not only assembly, I missed out on something. Not only assembly, it is true for multi-body part as well. there can be a multi-body part with surfaces, solids, and weldments as well. So by default, all sheet metal parts of uniform thickness will be treated as shells. Also surfaces, there is no choice for surfaces. All surfaces will be treated as shells. Weldments will be treated as beams. Exceptions, we have discussed it already in the previous slides. Remaining part will be treated as solid. All other parts will be treated as solid. Now this is what the software does on whatever understanding it has. However, the user has the option to move from one of them to another. He can, rather I should say again, surfaces, nothing much can be done. Surfaces are treated as surfaces. They will be treated as shell elements. We need to specify the thickness of surfaces. Whereas if it is a surface which has been created with a surface or shell mesh which has been created because of weldments, automatic conversion of weldment to shell mesh, then we have the option of treating that sheet metal part as a solid or as a remote mass, or what remains, that is the shells. Moving ahead, for solids, we can move them to beams, remote mass, or shell. And for weldments, it will be, we can only move it to solids. They cannot be treated as surfaces. Now, as give me a moment, I'll just, I've covered quite slides, so I'll check if anything important that I need to address immediately. I'll browse through the questions. Give me a moment. Okay, few questions which I would like to address quickly. That is, how do plane stress, plane strain models? No, we do not have any explicit option. We are not going in that direction. We are more towards realistic design, and we are trying to analyze the models which are created by designer. It would not be any idealization to that level. However, I can say at the moment we do not have. GeoStar has some options. You can explore if interested in more detail. When working on development part, well, the question is, when working on a weldment part, which method is more accurate, beam mesh or solid mesh? Uh, as I told you, by default, all weldments will be treated as beam mesh. However, try to understand, I would not like to use the word limitation. Try to understand the behavior of beam mesh, what it does and how it does, and use it selectively. Like there are few cases wherein there is no other option but to use beam mesh only. However, if a user wants to study the connection of that particular weldment to another solid part in detail, how it is connected, etc., then do not miss out on that thing. Like it would be good to convert it into a solid mesh. And let's move on. Give me a reason why it is not important shell normals in displacement and temperature results. This is a big long question. I will take this offline. Maybe through an SR I'll get back to you. Why SolidWorks is not having quad or hex mesh? Good question. That's the way it has been designed. At the moment, that's all I can say. As I told you, yes, quad elements had their own strength, hex elements had their own strength. That would help the user in reducing the number of elements, etc. But nowadays, quad elements are not bad. They are giving enough accuracy. Then why have one more element? It is giving you enough accuracy. We can go or have, instead of one brick element or a hex mesh element, we can have, I can say 4 quad elements and get the same quality of results. And we have enough processing power nowadays to give you the necessary uh, solutions even for those high number of elements. So I can say there are many ways in which it can be explained, but that's the way I can explain it at the moment. H and P adaptive, yes, we'll discuss it. Can we go to the previous slide again? Not now. Any other, sorry, these are the questions that I'm reading out and I don't want to miss out on any. Uh, Jacobian, please hold on. What are Jacobian points? Now it's fine. So I think actually there are many questions. I have addressed a few and I think I'll move on now because I need to finish the presentation as well. So let's move on. When I got a good break, connectors. So as I told you, very important thing while having mixed mesh is connection between shell, solid, surface, solid, etc. The software has a option rather when we are bonding, wherein the contact set manager has an option wherein we can bond vertices, edges, faces, joints, and the complete beam can be bonded to either the surface of shells or solids. Now, frankly, yes, there are a few cases wherein it is not possible to bond, and there were a few cases wherein the software did not warn that yes, this bonding is going to fail and we need to neglect that thing. But however, I would say in 2010, it has been fine-tuned a lot. A user has enough control on, rather not the user, the software has enough control on what this user is selecting. It will pop up enough warnings to tell you that don't this particular joint is connection is not supported, etc. So that's the way it happens. However, it has been fine-tuned enough. Ideally we can connect this set of solid joints, but be aware of a few things wherein the thickness of shell is considered while bonding. Hence, leave the necessary gap. Now, if it is a sheet metal part, obviously that gap will be by default present. However, if it is not, then I mean, if it is a surface thing, then that gap will not be present, and a user will be required to leave that gap appropriately. Finally, there is a case which I would not miss out on, wherein we cannot connect end faces of a sheet metal part using bonded contact, and I would suggest using the rigid connector over there. That would help you in connecting the sheet metal parts. There are few reasons why the bonded contact is not present, but the rigid connector can take you ahead. Behavior of the bond, as I told you, context is very important. Try to see the way a beam element is connected to the solid, etc. The connection is very important over there, especially if you are interested in seeing the stress and deflections at those adjoining points. So the behavior of a bond depends on whether the source entity belongs to a solid or shell. If the source is beam or shell, then the connection will be rigid. If the source is solid, then the connection is like a hinge. Try to understand it. Solid has 3 degrees of freedom and shell and beam will have 6 degrees of freedom, and hence the connection will be a hinged thing. When bonding a shell edge to a solid or shell target, the software rigidly bonds each node of the edge of the shell to the nearest element face on the target. So the rigidity of this connection will depend on the element size near the interface. If it is too small, then you might see a few stress singularities at that junction. Hence, it should be at least equal to the size of the thickness of the shell to have more appropriate results. To improve accuracy, the element size on the target face, what I said you, should be equal to the shell thickness. The element size on the target face should be equal to the thickness of the shell if no weld is used. If a weld is used, the element size on the target face should be equal to the weld size. Lot of points. I'm sure you'd like to have a look at this slide later on. However, as I'm running out of time, first of all, I apologize. I might shoot up by the 1 hour that has been given to me. However, I am sure the slide should be useful to you. I might run out on time, and I'm going to hurry up now a bit. Now that we have meshed it, connections are created. A user would be obviously interested in finding out the quality of the mesh that has been created. And we have two options. The options are present when we right click on the mesh we'll get the create mesh plot option. That will give us an option to either select aspect ratio or Jacobian check. These two checks have been given to check the quality of the mesh. Now, I have seen many questions on Jacobian check. First of all, do not miss out on the solution numbers that have been mentioned at the bottom of the slide. Apart from that, aspect ratio. Now, this is defined as the ratio between the longest edge and the shortest normal dropped from a vertex to the opposite face normalized with respect to a perfect tetrahedron. It's not specified anywhere wherein aspect ratio should be so much only to get the results, etc. However, for accurate results, people go or try to maintain their elements with the aspect ratio of less than 5, and it is permissible up to 20 as well. So I do not want to put a borderline, but that's what it is. And Jacobian, it measures the displacement of the mid-side nodes and is available for high quality mesh only. Software gives the option to check the Jacobian based on either 4, 16, 29 Gaussian points or at nodes. A negative Jacobian will lead to a solution failure. Now, this is an interesting thing. By default, the mesher is going to do this job. A user is not required much of hindrances. Obviously, if there is a negative Jacobian, the solver itself will stop. So do not worry too much. You will get the error message. And while meshing itself, we have the option wherein we are selecting what kind of Jacobian to be checked, the number of Gaussian points, or either it has to be at the nodes. We have the option in the meshing property manager itself. So again, the mesher will do this job. However, we have this option by which we can see the Jacobian variation throughout the mesh, and there are many benchmarks. However, I can say it is permissible to go up to a Jacobian of 40. So that's what it is. Now, if you see your mesh is not of this quality, and if you want to improve upon this mesh, changing the different parameters used in the meshers will help you in doing that. We have already discussed the different parameters present. Apply local mesh controls. We'll discuss it now, wherein we can apply a local mesh control to improve the mesh at that local place only. It is present on right clicking on the mesh feature in the study. You will see the option of apply mesh control. We can either apply it on the vertex, edge, or surface, or at the part level. We can specify a different element size, or and the variation of the elements are, from that element side to the later on. And the mesh control can be either at the vertex, as you can see over there, vertex, or it could be at the edges, it could be at the surfaces, it could be at the mesh, it could be on the geometry component level. So using these options, a user can attain the necessary quality of the mesh. So that's what it is. Now, next question would be, okay, I have done the meshing. Is this the optimal mesh? Is this the solution time taken is too huge? However, is this what I should spend on this geometry? Have I attained the necessary mesh convergence? That what is mesh convergence we'll discuss now. So we'll discuss it in more detail now. Any change in global mesh parameter will lead to a uniform change throughout the model, and hence will lead to huge number of elements if we are reducing the element size. So normally I have seen users who change the element size at the global level only, and obviously that is going to have a uniform mesh size throughout the model, large number of elements, huge solution time. Yes, we can do it blindly, but if we have an intelligent user, I would not suggest doing that. What he can do is use local mesh controls as those discussed in the previous slides. Use draft quality elements and refine the mesh in the localized regions only. Okay, use draft quality elements that will automatically reduce the degrees of freedom throughout the model, and later on we can apply local mesh controls to refine the mesh in the local regions only. Optimize the model to have more shells and beam elements. Now this is a controversial thing. Optimization has to be done based on your experience of the practical results, and do not miss out on that. But for accurate analysis, or if you want a faster analysis, a smarter way of analysis, do not miss out on that thing. Do the optimization of the model. Finally, mesh convergence. This is a rather many people do it normally. Now if I use a element size of 10, this is a graph of element size versus the one mesh stress. So if I use the element size of 10, it will give a certain stress value. Moving ahead, I reduce the element size, I'll get another stress value. Moving ahead, there is a little increase in stress, not too much. Moving ahead, it has increased too much. It has, I can say comparatively, it is increased a lot. So you can see there is a certain amount of variation when you are reducing the mesh size up till this value. However, for the when we reduce it further, there is no change in the results. So this is the mesh that you want. So element size of 3 is more than enough for your present geometry. So that's what has rather, if it is a accurate final analysis, then I would suggest do not every user to do this one. H adaptive. Now what we are discussing now is how we are going to achieve quality results by using different meshing techniques or better mesh quality, different controls on doing that. And these two methods, that is automatic adaptive methods, that is H adaptive and P adaptive, are present in the at the solver level. You can explore it in more detail through the below solutions and use them to get the necessary quality of mesh. So what H adaptive method does, give me a moment, I'll check if any. So what H adaptive method is, it will reduce the elements in regions with higher errors, and we have the option of specifying the accuracy of that error, right? Set the accuracy level for the strain energy norm. The below solutions will definitely help you in understanding what is strain energy norm. So we can set the accuracy level that we want to attain. We can specify the accuracy bias, that is either we can improve the mesh on the at the global level, or we can improve the mesh at the local level only, and this bias is specified over here. We can specify the number of loops. The limit is 5, that is it can do up to 5 iterations to attain the level of accuracy that you have specified. Apart from that, we have the mesh coarsening option, using which we can coarsen the mesh in regions with lower error and improve the mesh in regions with higher errors. Finally, the second method, which is the P adaptive method. Now here, no remeshing of the object occurs. However, the quality of elements is improved. How is it improved? The polynomial of elements used in each element is improved over here. Now, again, over here there are different norms in terms of error which we can specify. We have the total strain energy. This is the total strain energy or the complete model. We can select one of these things, that is either total strain energy or RMS one mesh stress or RMS resultant displacement, and say the limit or the permissible error over there. And thereon we have one more control, that is update elements with relative strain energy error. Now moving ahead, as we discussed just now, we have linear elements and quadratic elements. These particular elements can move to a higher order, that is second order up to fifth order. This is the limitation, 2 to 5, and these only those elements which are not giving the necessary accuracy will be improved using this particular method, localized improvement of quality of the elements. So we are specifying the starting P order or the order of the polynomial, the maximum order, and the maximum number of loops. Now, this is a small note over here. It is recommended to set Jacobian check, what we discussed previously, to at nodes. There are different, as I told you, we can specify 4, 16, 19 at Gaussian points, etc. We need to specify it at nodes when using the P method, because we have seen solution failures, and later on facing this problem, instead of that, it is better to do it while meshing itself. Hence, set it to at nodes. Few limitations of P method. P method works with solid elements only. Shells are not supported. Beams are also not supported. Does not work with non-uniform pressure, non-uniform forces, or multiple pressures defined on a single phase. So that's a bit of limitation. Well, when not to use adaptive methods. Now, this is not a, I should not say this is a, this has to be done, or this is the way to do it, or these are the guidelines, but a few observations which I have got depending on the technical support queries that are issued. Sorry. Models with stress singularity. At least do a single analysis without using the adaptive method. If there is any stress singularity in the model, then do not use it for adaptive method. models with large number of contacts and connectors. Obviously, if you are using H adaptive method in such a case, then it is going to shoot up the number of elements that are used. And I missed out on something. In case of stress singularity, obviously the error is going to increase as and when the iterations are done. The number of elements are going to increase, and the mesh convergence will not be in the right direction. Instead of converging, you are diverging if a stress singularity is present in the setup. Third thing, again, H adaptive is good for parts. I don't say we cannot use it for assemblies. We can use it for assemblies, but this is an observation which I got from the queries that I receive regularly. H adaptive is good for parts. P adaptive is good for assemblies, and that's all. That's all I can say. So moving ahead, a tool which I do not want to miss out. Obviously, people want to attain or use the geometry as it is. However, for if it is seen from analysis point of view, if a certain feature is not going to reduce the strength of the geometry, do not miss out on this feature. Simplify, when you right click on the mesh, you have this option of simplify model for meshing. Using this option, we can get a list of small fillets, chamfers, holes, extrudes, revolves that are present in the geometry, and we can either suppress them, we can create a new derived configuration and keep it over there after modifying these small changes, and definitely that would help you in having a more model with less number of elements, less number of degrees of freedom, and a faster solution without affecting the results. Now, obviously, when you are changing something, why is it not going to affect the results? It is going to affect, but if a user is smart enough, he can play around with the right features which are not necessary and have a faster analysis, simplify the model and get a faster analysis. A few common questions, mistakes, and on attaining a good quality mesh and results. Now there are many things that were in my mind, but I have tried to come down to very few of them. I have around 4 to 5, not much of them, but I would not like to miss out on those things. Give me a moment. Yeah. First question, why does the mesher wait for a long time after it has reached around 98 to 99% of the meshing? Now, there are many reasons for that thing. One could be even it is saving the mesh after the meshing is done. However, one interesting thing which I do not want to miss out is we have seen this behavior in mixed mesh meshing, wherein at the end of the study, at the end of the meshing, it will be trying to realign the shell elements. And especially in case of large models, it will be abnormally high. So be aware of this thing and use the automatic realignment option selectively. Do not, maybe for large models, or there could be models wherein no realignment happens, but yet we are wasting a lot of time in this process. So I would suggest unselect this option. You know where this option is, I have already discussed it. Unselect it option, mesh it, browse through the geometry, check if really there is any necessary thing of realignment, and then do the local if there is only 1 or 2 surfaces which need to be realigned, then we can even manually do it. I have already discussed how to do it manually. A tip, mesh fails at the assembly level. However, at part level, it meshes, all the parts mesh separately. Now, first of all, check the mesh size used in the parts. Like when you are using a part and trying to mesh it, check the mesh size used over there. Try using it at the assembly level. Either use a local mesh control, apply that mesh size at that component or on that component and mesh it, or um, uh, or use this particular option, that is remesh fail parts with incompatible mesh. I have already discussed it. This is a very good option wherein the mesher will do the remeshing with the incompatible mesh. And this is the thing, like when we are moving a part from part level into a big assembly, the difference will be the contacts, the bonded contacts, and those are going to increase the complexity for the meshing solvers, and that can lead to mesh failures. For relatively small or big parts, use local part level mesh and use the second thing, that is remesh filled parts also, and that should help you in attaining the necessary mesh at the assembly level also. But provided, as I told you, all the parts are getting meshed at the local level. Now, very interesting thing, when not to use beam and shell mesh. Again, as I told you, connections are very critical. I've taken a simple example over here. It includes two beams, a solid part, a shell part, a connector, many different things are there. Now, I would like to highlight on the connections over here. If obviously, as I told you, all elements are treated as beams and they would look something like this. Connections would be something would be you can see the zoomed out image over here. It is, I can say it is weird. This is like not right. Now, what is the thing that I want to say over here? If a user interested in finding out the accurate stresses at these connection points, the accurate deflections at these connection points, then this is not the right geometry. Rather, this is not the right mesh. We would prefer treating these beam elements as solids only. We have to stay with the large number of elements created, but that's the way it is. However, if the user is not interested in these local things, the user is just interested in finding out the overall displacement in this complete model, then this is a good model. So every given model, do not miss out on doing this analysis. What I could say is analysis not in the software, but in our part, to check if what I'm doing is correct or not, whether a beam mesh is really required or not required. Should we go ahead with the beam mesh, shell mesh, or solid mesh? So do not miss out on that. Beam connectors go missing on a update. Now, this is a common problem, and I may not say it is a problem, rather software has given enough good tools by which the beam connectors are created. Rather, that's the way SolidWorks simulation works, wherein every beam has two connectors at the end of it. If necessary, sometimes because of connections, there will be a few mid-side connectors as well. And when we are moving from a SolidWorks part to a steady, automatically certain beam connectors are created or lost. So if it is a small geometry, not a big deal. However, if it is a big assembly, then there can be large number of chances wherein either the number of connectors change, the connector numbering changes, etc., etc. So if there are large number of beams involved, and if any changes done at the geometry level, I would suggest the user to browse through the simulation setup and check if all the loads are attached at the right connectors, and even connections are good. Of course, the software will do its part wherein it will warn you that the connection has gone missing or the beam numbers have given changed or with a warning symbol. However, I would recommend user intervention over these things if at all some changes are done at the geometry level. Hence, as soon as I told you just now discussed, as soon as a modification is done in the geometry, then the recalculation happens and we need to check it. For again, for simple geometries, it's not a big deal. However, for big assemblies, do not miss out on that thing. Now, mesh failures on even simple parts on a new machine, on a certain user, on a file taken from a remote location. There are n number of different things that can be discussed over here. Can be n number of different problems, but I have seen all of them boil down to only these two things. Do not miss out on these two things. Right mouse button click on the steady properties result folder. This is the folder where the temporary mesh files or the files that will be created during meshing will be stored. Ensure that the user has read-write permissions over there. Apart from that, we have this simulation options, default options, result folder. So there are many things that I can discuss over here, but these two I think are the key points. Do not miss out on them. These two folders are going, the permission on these two folders are going to decide the failure or the success of the mesh. This is in the SolidWorks thing, wherein under tools, you'll find two tools, that is geometry analysis and geometry tool check. As I told you, somebody asked me like, what would be the minimum curvature, minimum element size that has to be used in the curvature measure. So these are tools which will help you in finding out what are the small features present in your geometry. Use these tools smartly to check if there are any problems at the geometry level itself. Now this is a standard message wherein surface mesh is successful, however solid mesh fails, and the message says volume mesh failed. Reducing the element size or increasing the number of elements per circle may help. Now yes, obviously blindly user is going to do that, and he is going to try out different smaller element size, but I would like to highlight a few more things over here. Use the tools mentioned previously. I told you 2 tools now. Use those tools, either Simplify Geometry or the tools geometry analysis tool, to find out what intricate things are present in the geometry which can lead to mesh failure. Apart from that, if it is geometric like created in SolidWorks, then when you are right clicking on mesh and seeing the failure diagnostic, that in itself is showing you the feature that is failing. However, if it is an imported geometry, then apart from the tools that we have already discussed, the simplest visual tool would be use the hidden lines visible option. Use this option and browse through the model. Now I have used this particular example. You can see it is a very good looking geometry, nothing wrong, perfect. But use the hidden lines option and you will find something fishy over there. You can see there is a surface inside the geometry, and that's the culprit in such failures. When you hide or delete the top surface, you'll see that internal problematic surface. So this could be one more option, simple visual option to find out problematic geometries. Is the default element size giving the right result? Now this is a blind faith present in many users, wherein they say, I have set the mesh to default and why am I not getting the right results? No, it's just rather it rarely gives, it happens so that the default element size is giving you the perfectly accurate right result. It can happen also, but rarely it happens. It is only a suggestion. Once you run the analysis with that element size, you may want to evaluate whether the local mesh refinements are necessary to improve the result quality at stress concentration points. Do not miss out on that. Like we need to play around with the results, check the results. Am I getting the right results? We need to do enough iterations to get the right, enough iterations of the mesh to get the right results, accurate results. Now, default mesh has a complex logic using which we have not shared the logic anywhere, but using which it will arrive at the certain element size. It will mesh it with that thing, and that is the best way the model can be meshed, or the best element size with which it can be meshed. However, I would like to highlight over here, when we move the cursor over there, it is multiplying by 2, like the element size is multiplied by 2 and reducing by 2 when we move the cursor to the fine side. And even though this appears to be small, users do it blindly and end up with high element size and degrees of freedom. Do not do it. Use it properly. That's all I can say. I do not have much time to explain on that thing, but that's all I will say. The default mesh size is a mesh size that makes sense for your model. I can say it makes sense for your model. However, the user has to play around with the mesh to get the right mesh with the right quality of results, for the right quality of results rather. Now again, this might appear to be a solver thing, but I have seen this problem creeping in due to a improper mesh. Now that is loads and boundary conditions are not transferred. This is a typical problem that can occur due to mesh, and hence I have included it over here. If the faces on which loads and resistance have been applied are very small, then ensure that appropriate mesh controls are applied at that particular surfaces. If not, then the mesh might miss out on those surfaces. The surface is not at all captured, and transfer is fair. Now yes, somebody might say it should automatically capture those things, etc. But this is the reality at the moment. I would suggest applying local mesh controls if you are getting such a mesh error or warping, etc. Finally, the last slide. I have shooted up by 20 minutes if there were reasons like question and answers, etc. But we are at the end. So a typical mistake that I think we used to do as of now, wherein call the TS team the next time you face a meshing problem. Please do not do it. You have enough options that have been discussed just now in the presentation, webinar, webcast, whatever. And you have the VAR desktop, search the knowledge base for more directions online help is there that will also give you enough literature on understanding a certain parameter. Finally, if things go out of your hand, yes, you are welcome. Please come up and uh, ask the create ASR and ask the questions. So that's all I had to discuss. Thank you for your time. I hope the session was useful to all of you. Any questions, please, the session is open for questions. We'll discuss it through the question answer session. However, those users who want to carry on can go ahead with their work. If anything, they can create a SR and I will try to address those questions through the SR. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time. I'll take a bit of pause and let's discuss on the questions later on. I'll just browse through the questions before that. Yeah, thank you. Common question is, will the PPT be available? Yes, it will be available through VAR Desktop Marketing Webcast, and there is a solution number which I'll give you just a second. Of course, the recording is yet happening, hence I give me a moment. I missed out on something. I'll give the solution number. It is okay. I can share this. Hopefully, yes, here it is. So you can see the solution number over here. It will be present in the solution. Give me 1 or 2 days before it is all the recording is updated, and you'll see the presentation over there. Okay, so let me browse through the questions. Anything which I need to address immediately? Yeah. Thank you. Which might be useful for everyone. It's like how the measure will connect beam to solid plate or shell. Is it through beam joints or beam itself? Now, yes, there are there are different terminologies. Some say it is rigid links, some say it is equations. But in short, I can say the different degrees of freedoms will be connected through equations. In short, that's it. So there is an equation which will drive the degrees of freedom of a solid or shell or beam to the adjoining node on the other side. So that's what it is. Weldment's composite structural members, no, at the moment we cannot do it. There is a specific question is something like this. If we have weldment structure made from composite structural members, how can we mesh it? Yes, we cannot do it at the moment. It's a limitation. How to do plane stress? I have discussed it when working on weldment parts. That is more accurate. working on weldment parts, which method is more accurate? I think I had discussed it. Give me reasons why is it not important for sure reasons. I think this is self-explanatory. However, I can explain it later on. The question is, give me reason why is it not important that shell normals are not important in displacement and temperature results. Well, temperature, as you are aware, it is only 1 degree of freedom, and displacement, I need some more time to do, like I would take time to explain it in more detail. So I'll take it offline. Why SolidWorks is not having, we have discussed it. Etch and adaptive, it is also a word question, I already discussed it. Can we go to the previous slide? No, we cannot go here now. Any other elements apart from tetrahedron high quality mesh? No, I think no voice. No, it should be louder. I'm able to. Not able to. Well, I think almost all the questions which I think are general to everyone have been addressed. There are a few questions which remain. I'll save this chat session and talk directly to the person who has asked the question. These are more specific questions, and I'm sure those could be related to whatever he's doing at his end, and I'll address them separately. I think it's time to end this webinar. However, before that, I just want to check out on any if I have missed out on anything. Once again, thanks a lot for all of you. And yeah, there are a few requests which say more such webinars on different topics. Please keep writing over here. I'll try to organize them. This was just the beginning. We'll try to organize. No, the solution is not yet available. There is a question whether the solution is already available. As you are aware, I'm yet in the process of recording the session. So once the session is recorded, once the session is over, I'll upload it. Please wait for another 5 to 6 hours. Yeah. Anything else that I missed out? I'm just browsing through the questions. Yes, I think almost all the common questions have been addressed. The specific questions, I'll take them offline. Again, almost all of the attendees are VARs or TTM, so feel free to create an SR with the attention to me, that is Kapil, or whatever questions remain over there, I'll come up with the answers to those things. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to all.